Hello and welcome to episode 297 of the Thursday Night Podcast. We are getting scarily close to the triple century mark.
Yeah, that's gross in the best way. Heck yeah.
We are still kicking 6-7 years later. It still doesn't feel all that real as the numbers keep getting bigger, but kind of a mixed bag here to get to. There's no real theme. It's just kind of like there's stuff that's happened in a bunch of different sports, so we'll get to that, as well as at the end of the episode we cut an interview with Shane Mettlen of the Daily News Record, who's covered JMU basketball. He saw Coach Jon Cremins, his impact up front, up close and personal as a part of Mark Byington's staff in Harrisonburg as they put together a championship team in the Sun Belt. So wanted to reach out to someone who had gotten that kind of insight before to see his thoughts on the hire, kind of touch on the state of the Sun Belt basketball as a whole. So it's a good interview there at the end that we will tag at the end there. But along with that, along with baseball having a good weekend, along with some assorted news about, Georgia State athletics, the NCAA as a whole, an NCAA tournament berth for Georgia State athletics team. Got to start where we have been kind of teasing this podcast the last several months, and especially the last couple of weeks in particular. Ted Hurst is the best draft pick in Georgia State football history. It goes 84th overall in the 2026 NFL draft to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the NFC South. Falcons fans can shudder about that because they're going to have to see if Ted's successes will in some fashion be the Falcons' failures in the division up against each other. It was kind of like it was out of doubt. David had it pegged perfectly. The exact point in the third round he was going to go. I guess I'll let you take a victory lap on that whenever you want to. But
absolutely, I was trying so hard not to be online to see the picks spoiled because I used to be that type of person, and it's not fun at all. Not to
NBA
get on a
draft
soapbox.
has been ruined.
Yes, exactly. I don't know. There's just something
Shams
about
Charania. So-and-so is tantalized by Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Yeah,
that's the number 13 pick. What are we doing? That's
horrible, And I also think it takes away from, just the raw emotion of some of these players. That stuff is really cool. It's funny you mentioned the Falcons because when it happened, I just mentally was oh wow, that's really exciting. That's exactly where I thought it was. And then it was just womp, womp, womp. Because I have no beef with Tampa Bay, but obviously a Georgia State wide receiver going to an NFC South rivals NFL team is certainly not the greatest, but it's incredible. All year, and I think the thing that has not hit me is over the last 5-6 years, we've seen talk of okay, this Georgia State specifically wide receiver, he's really good, he could go to the draft, and then Jamari Thrash transferred out and went to Louisville. Sam Pinckney, transferred out and went to Coastal Carolina. Well, this time the Georgia State wide receiver did not transfer, and it wasn't Roger Goodell, obviously, but I don't even know who that guy was.
Gene Deckerhoff,
voice
of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as well as Florida State football for many years. So it was funny when he came on. He was going into a spiel. I forget, something led to him saying the word touchdown. He's and speaking of touchdowns, I was this is going to be a wide receiver. This might be Ted. And then it happened. And it was a weird phenomenon watching it because there was just the crazy run there in the third round after the first pick of the second round was Stribling out of Ole Miss. And so it's all right, wide receiver run's going to start early on this day. There'd been talk of maybe Ted and some other receivers going in the second round. Doesn't happen. There's a whole dearth of receivers there for about 20-30 picks, and then it's 8 in 17 picks, something crazy, and Ted came near the end of that. I think you had some helmet sticker bias getting in there, just calling it what it is. You had some other similar profiles of receiver as Ted Hurst going earlier who played at better programs, and so whether they want to admit it or not, I think some of the GMs and draft rooms made some of those choices. But where I land on, besides the Falcons of it all, and of course there's going to be a phenomenal catch for him that in Mercedes-Benz in the eye hole of the Falcons is going to cost them dearly. It's a really good fit for him.
a sneaky, disgustingly good fit. And I'm mad about it because it honestly didn't even cross my radar. But if you look at the Buccaneers 2-deep, like, it makes so much sense.
Yeah, first let's start here is that they've just done a really good job of developing receivers. Like, just straight up, they have a track record on this stuff. And, they're not the same type of receiver, but Chris Godwin, he has had some injuries in the recent years that have kind of hid his career and kind of stunted it a bit. But do you know in the 2017 draft when Chris Godwin was selected by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
Wasn't he like a second or third rounder? Something like that?
He was a third rounder. He was the 84th pick in the 2017 draft.
I promise you I did not think that he was. I felt like that was too easy.
Yeah, I was just doing a little research because I was like, I know he wasn't a first rounder, and he's a guy that they developed and found the traits they liked and turned into an all-pro type guy. And it's literally they picked him at the exact same spot in the draft, which just one of those just crazy circumstantial things, just how it lines up. But beyond that, they get Emeka Egbuka in last year's draft, which it isn't a concern for me as an onlooker of just like wanting Ted to have the best spot that they're going receiver after having gotten a first-round receiver last year, because they need a different type of receiver than Egbuka, especially because Mike Evans is going to play for the San Francisco 49ers from now on. And it's dangerous to say that Ted is replacing Mike Evans because that's a future guy going to Canton, and stepping into his shoes on day one is unrealistic expectations to place on him. But that is the type of receiver that they were looking to have. A big-bodied receiver who can be that type of threat for them at the X position. That they have some other talented receivers. Godwin, if he can get healthy, is that. Egbuka certainly was a big piece of their offense in his rookie season already. They'll probably look to see even more from him in year two. But Ted is going to offer something that they need whenever he can provide it. And because he's third-round pick, they're probably going to give him some runway to develop at the next level. And they've done it before. So you can look at it and say, they like him, they like these traits, and they've been an organization that has been able to get the most out of the receiving prospects that they get in the draft. And so, loath as Falcons fans will be to hear it, this is a really good place for Ted to have landed, and it's still in the third round. And honestly, if you hear the way people talk about second rounders, especially if it's like, you have an exciting name in the first round, you're looking to build on that with the second round, there's certain expectations that I feel like you're avoiding dropping to the third round. The money's a little bit different, obviously, but still life-changing. But going in the third round, it feels like there's a lot less risk for fans looking on, like who are going to put all this pressure on, whereas with the second rounder, there's levels to this things. And so I almost feel like, as cool as it would have been to have Ted be drafted as early as possible, go in the 30s or the 40s or the 50s, I feel like third round is a nice medium where it is going to be, this is a guy that they really liked, they wanted to get as early as possible, they took in the top 100, but maybe just that little bit less of this guy from Georgia State who the helmet sticker might make fans a little bit skeptical as well. Give them a little bit of leeway to grow because it's a third rounder, and that's the type of round that if you hit, it's like, that was a great find in the third round, versus if you don't hit in the second round, it starts to get into, it's not like you're the number one pick and you're a bust, but it's something similar where the second rounder doesn't work out. Like, fan bases remember that type of stuff.
Yeah, obviously every team thinks that they're going to win the Super Bowl once Mr. Irrelevant's name is called. But I was listening to Todd Bowles recently I think today or yesterday did an interview. And if there's one person that's a fan, it's of Ted Hurst. It's certainly him. He kind of describes him as a hidden project that, can help us, in talking about the team. And he seemed legitimately excited and trying to work him into the offense and getting him on the same page with Baker Mayfield. I'm not, we don't have any illusions that Ted Hurst is wide receiver one in Tampa or anything like that right now. I think on the 2-deep on ESPN, take it with a grain of salt, he's going to be working behind Godwin. But like you said, Godwin's have, we play fantasy football. We can be honest here. Godwin's had injuries. I think there is going to be ample opportunity for Ted, if he has a good, mini camp, rookie camp, gets to OTAs and is able to show that he can be a good route runner. Because, I think a lot of people, this is a warning for people if you're listening to this. Please do not worry about drops in preseason for NFL players. Drops will happen. I don't think that'll happen necessarily to Ted, because that wasn't really his game at Georgia State or anything like that. But, like, drops happen. I mean, Jamar Chase had a horrible rookie preseason, and look at him now, you know, so... But as long as he's able to show that ability to run those routes, you know, get downfield, use his body and his size, I really think that this is a really good spot for him, and he's going to play. You know, maybe it's not going to be, you know, by week 6 or something, he's going to be just the starting X and, you know, whatever. But I think he's going to have a pretty solid rookie year just as a backup wide receiver, you know, being in some of those lighter on the running backs and tight end personnel packages.
Yeah, it's kind of like two tracks. Like, they've clearly got, like, a big picture view that they need him to develop in certain areas that he didn't do as much at Georgia State. But, like, right now, he could be a guy that you look up and he gets, like, 2 40-yard catches in the span of, like, 5 weeks and, like, has some really big plays that make the highlight reel people put on Twitter, people notice, but maybe isn't consistently what they're hoping to get him to be eventually. But it's kind of the two things where it's like right now you're hoping he can just be a guy that can get you big plays here and there, kind of grow into a bigger role where more is asked of him over the years. And, you know, hopefully by the time his rookie contract is they're starting X and they feel really comfortable and he can get that second deal and continue to grow from there. You know, maybe at that point he can go to the Falcons and get that second deal with Atlanta, and that'd be a nice little fun coming home thing for him there, as I can manifest that a bit. It is ultimately just a really joyous day for him. And, you know, say what it is, Del McGee, wide receiver coach Damian Craig, there's not been a ton of great days. You know, there's certainly during the course of the fall, taking 11 losses this past season. This is something for the program and the coaching staff to celebrate and try and keep that positive momentum going there of, like, this is, for all that went wrong in the fall of 2025 Georgia State football, this was not one of them. And this is the culmination of a lot of hard work by Ted, work that was helped put in by the coaching staff and all the development people here at Georgia State, and ultimately just a life-changing day for him and his family. And so just an awesome story reaches its conclusion, and now we'll get to follow the journey of Ted Hurst, NFL wide receiver, as he goes through the next year with the Bucs.
I mean, I would argue that this is a huge development for Georgia State's football brass. I mean, you know, say what you want to say about what the results on the field. They just got a player drafted whose college career, the record for those college teams was 4-20. You know, like, I think I'm not. Pick third round pick at that. You know, like, not only were they able to keep him after a 3-9 season, not only did he continue to showcase that he was a very talented NFL caliber wide receiver in a 1-11 season, he went in the 3rd round, you know, and I don't want to say that, you know, it's all on the coaching staff. Obviously, this is Ted's achievement. This is, you know, all the hard work. You know, he was out there doing those running routes and all that stuff. He was the one who went to the combine.
Cannot imagine the amount of work that he put in personally over the last few months. I mean, crushed every step of this process. That includes a lot of long days and just leaving it all on the table to put the best possible image of yourself out for these NFL teams, and he did it.
Absolutely. You know, and I know that, you know, with the way that NIL is, and I think I saw a stat that was like, 9 or something, Power 6 or G6 or whatever. I
think it was 13.
13? Okay. And no FCS players were drafted for the first time in like 40 some odd years, you know, which it makes sense given what the transfer portal is.
Former FCS players certainly were drafted, but they were not. They didn't stay at the school they were at. And for whatever it's worth, and, you know, NFL coaches and personnel people are all like boomers. You call it what it is, derogatory or not. A lot of them fit into that demographic, and it fits along with the idea of, like, them being enamored with the fact that Ted Hurst stayed where he was. And they mentioned it. It wasn't the GM. It was their, like, VP of player development who was giving the quotes. Mike Beal is his name. In the immediate day 3 press conference for the Bucs. And he talked about the fact that he transferred to Georgia State from Valdosta, and then at that point played a couple of years there, had opportunities to go to bigger schools with NIL stuff, and stayed loyal to Georgia State. It's kind of a little bit it's kind of refreshing a little bit in this day and age that guys choose to do that sometimes. I think that was certainly a part of the appeal, even with these NFL teams he was talking to. Like, they saw him stand on principle and stick at a place where he felt comfortable. And you hope you can keep making that pitch to guys that are able to maybe not have the exact seasons Ted has, but like, it is, if you can keep the momentum going as far as whether it's not a third rounder every year, but next year maybe you have a guy who's getting taken in the 5th, 6th round. A couple of guys getting drafted. It's starting to be a lot less attainable for Sun Belt teams and group of 6 teams as you laid out in the numbers, but like, if this can be the start of continuing to show people as you're out there recruiting that, yes, we can take you directly to the NFL from here, that is why all these players go to these programs like Georgia, like Michigan. And that's not to say that you can get to that level, but it's like ultimately the reason why players decide to go somewhere is they want to play in the NFL, and that program can take them there. This is even as bad as the football has been on the field. This is as close as Georgia State's been able to make that pitch in a realistic way, with the level of achievement Hurst was able to do, getting his name called on Friday night, first time a Georgia State player has been taken in the first 5 rounds. That is at least a sea change as far as the perception is going. And now the rest of it is going to be, you're going to have to start winning more games. You're going to have to win over the fans that way. But time will tell how important this could be as far as whether Del McGee reaps the rewards or not. Whoever in the next 5 years, 10 years of Georgia State football, if this is the start of something where there starts to be the idea that you can go to the league from here, if that is something that is on players' minds on a more regular basis, better players will come here and want to stay here. And so we'll see how that all plays out with the vision Coach McGee has, whoever has down the line after him, if that's realistic in this day and age with the transfer portal. But that's kind of where your mind has to go if you're a fan of one of these teams, because it's like you need them to find that juice to be able to do that, because otherwise you're going to have another long drought like Georgia State just went through where they weren't having anyone drafted, let alone in the 3rd round.
And, there's probably some wide receiver prospect, like high schooler, who knows, Georgia State.
On the roster even.
Yeah, honestly, on the team even, like, they saw that and they said, okay, this is a place that I can go. And yeah, we're not dumb. Obviously, it's going to be harder this day and age, but I there's no way to say what I'm about to say without sounding like a boomer. So please forgive me. At some point, college football was about, this is a part of my development getting to the next step, and that next step is the league. The more players that Georgia State can put in the league, just rising tides, they'll probably be better football teams. I know that it's a little hard for me to say that after I just said that Ted Hurst, was a part of 4 wins in his 2 years at Georgia State, but still, there's 11 players on both sides of the ball. And, if you had 11 Ted Hurst type talents at all those positions, Georgia State probably isn't, 1-11 last year. So, but, like we said, congrats to Ted, congrats to, the Georgia State football apparatus. And hopefully next year, this time, we're talking about somebody else that was good enough to be drafted in the 3rd round.
And not letting the Ted Hurst stuff go, we will certainly continue to track that stuff. And especially as he is making things happen in the NFL, we will be tracking that here on the Thursday night podcast. Never will be a bad idea to just bump in and just like, oh, by the way, this happened, that a Georgia State alum, did 80-yard touchdown in this game, or whatever the case may be. So certainly we'll always make room for that news as it comes. We track what he's able to do in Tampa Bay. More to come on that. Maybe some news that's going to be a lot less exciting for Georgia State fans, but we'll talk about it here on the podcast anyway. Kind of been a lingering question for a while. It's kind of like the status going into even this next athletic season for athletic director Charlie Cobb, who's been here now 12 years, back from 2014. And the answer is, at least for now, he is not going anywhere. This is from our colleague Ben Moore at Panther Talk. Documents acquired by PT. He has received a contract extension through August 2028, so he will be here a further 2 years. His contract was due to expire in August of this year, and a lot more on the site as far as the details of the contract that I'll let you go read there on PT. there are a couple of trains of thought here for me. The first is like, I'm not going to sell people who have been kind of souring on, athletics hasn't had their flagship programs winning games. And ultimately, people are going to lay that at the feet of the athletic director. If things aren't going well on the field or on the court or on the diamond, that is ultimately their purview. And so another 2 years of this after it's not been going well for the last 4 or 5, certainly I think it's going to play a certain way, and there's no way to spin that otherwise, and I'm not going to try. I will say that my second read on it was that Dr. Blake, President Blake, has made a big pitch now recently about the 5-year plan. Feels like he is as involved as he has ever been on the athletic side and taking more of an interest in the athletics stuff. And he's talked about a 5-year plan that Charlie helped him write. This is a 2-year extension. Like, it's not like this is the contract that says, and this is who is going to be seeing through all of this. And so I did notice kind of the discrepancy there of like, yes, his contract was going to be up, and so there's an extension. But this isn't like the head coach who won 10 games in 5 seasons just got a 5-year extension on top of it to keep going. It's like, this is not locking them into a crazy long future of more of the same. And I don't know. I guess I don't know. I don't have any insight of what Charlie is thinking as far as the rest of his career goes. But I kind of feel like I'd now set 2028 as the date where I expect there will be a new athletic director. And now saying all of that, I think it starts to really reflect on President Blake. If we're 2 years down the line, things haven't improved, and he's made this choice to stay with Charlie Cobb, the souring is going to move from Charlie's desk to the bigger desk at the president's office and Brian Blake, as far as like, it feels like he is taking the reins more and taking more of using more of the might of his title and his power to shape this in a better direction. And so the clock starts ticking on him and what he's able to do in that sense.
Yeah, I feel bad for people who aren't going to like this, but if you, kind of take a step back and look at it from an 1,000-foot point of view, it just makes sense. People don't really operate their best in sports when they're on a, final year of their contract. I think it's a little bit different for players, especially at the professional level. But when it comes to executives, you don't want the fact that they don't have stability clouding their judgment. And I mean, look, we are not going to sit on this podcast and lie to people, each other, anybody, about the results from Georgia State the last, 4 years in basketball, 2 years in football. I don't think they went to a bowl game the year before then either. So we'll say 3.
I mean, they did in Elliott's last year, but it was the 6-1 to 6-6.
That's right.
Again, it turned what had been like a great season trending into like a sour taste in the mouth, even though still a winning record and all the rest of it when they won the bowl game. And it still has never been. They haven't had a Sun Belt title in football. They haven't. We'll get to it later. The beach volleyball is doing great, but other than that, there has not been many sports other than men's basketball that have reached that pinnacle. And so you're still waiting for that. And when it's been 12 years, certainly people are going to get a sense of like, well, what's going to change in years 13 and 14 that wasn't there in years 1 to 12. So I get it.
I do, yeah.
Like you say, we're not, this isn't the sunshine and roses and like trying to give everyone the sense that everything is, everything hasn't been great. They fired both basketball coaches a month ago. And as we covered on this podcast, it didn't get handled 100% great. There were certainly issues that we voiced with how they handled the process with the basketball coaches. I do think that's a part of the equation also, though, that you talk about people don't want to go to the end of the deal. It's honestly kind of a bungling, or whatever word you want to describe it, that it got to this point anyway without like that this wasn't just announced and that we found out through just looking up journalism, doing the job of finding out this stuff. And it didn't speak to a great level of like, they didn't put this out on the front page. Like when it happened, it was like, we are going to announce this. So you can take that for what it's worth as well. But
and I like, to be clear, I think that is very loud. That silence, I think that silence is very loud. And I don't even say that to be overly critical of anybody here, but if you have a guy who you really want to throw your full support by, you do make something like that front page. The fact that it wasn't front page, that says something. And so, like, for people who think that this is just I don't know what 13th and 14th year is just going to magically change, I agree with you. I also don't know what's going to be different about that. But you can tell in some ways, you can kind of infer that Georgia State also is not just going to sit here idly, which is, going back to the coaches, like, that is a level of care that, people have been begging for Georgia State to show. So even if it is a form of silence and you want to read too much into silence like I do, I do think that is a little bit important.
And then, the other part of it is just reality of, I don't think that President Blake wanted to go through a dual basketball coaching search and potentially a football coaching search as soon as this winter, depending if things do not improve, either without an AD or I guess you'd want to put in your new AD. I think probably people are hoping that things improve for football, if no other reason than it would be a lot better for the future if they're going to have to make a change in the next 2 or 3, 1 or 2, 3 years, to have the new AD have the football job as something that they can grab onto to want this position. Because certainly it is a lot more attractive getting to make a hire like that at the marquee program in athletics rather than getting saddled with the last guy's hire who he just brought in. So it's not like you can fire him after a year. So it's tricky. Like, it's a really hard thing to find the middle on. And the truth of it is you just need to have, like, a plan. You need to have some conviction behind how you're handling it. And so Georgia State fans just kind of have to hope that that's the case with what President Blake has in mind, especially if we are on like a 2-year time horizon and we are thinking by August 2028 there'll be someone else in charge. But I think the realities of not wanting to add this search on top of what was already going on, to say nothing of, if you're asking someone to stay on, you're not going to say, can you do like a 6-month extension? Like, can we just get through January? Can we get through April? That's not going to fly. You have to give some kind of terms there to make it an interesting and appealing option for Charlie Cobb to want to stay if you're asking him to stay on. And so I think there's a lot of this is just kind of the realities of contract and when they were up and what other balls were in the air. But I'll say this, that when we are on this podcast a year from now talking about another athletic season, one, it can't be as bad across the board as it has been. And two, there's going to have to be some action put to the words that they've started to really preach about this, campus, the city downtown, the campus downtown, whatever the phrase. They got to do some more press releases. I don't have this terminology down pat. I haven't heard them say it. They've said it a couple of times repeatedly, but not enough to where it's just like seared in my brain. They've pitched a lot with this, with the renderings that were put out, the athletics village, bringing softball along with baseball into the same footprint with football stadium, the plans to bring in a new practice indoor, outdoor practice facility, and finish off changes that need to come with enhancing the football stadium. You got to see a year from now that like things have been trending in that direction. Otherwise, people are just going to think, as they continue to believe, that it's a lot of words and not a lot of payoff. And so, again, ball's still in Charlie's court because he is still in this job. Ball is in President Blake's court because he, I think, is taking a stronger stance toward trying to tell people he is the guy changing these things. And so a year from now, halfway through this new extension of the deal for Charlie, we'll have a greater sense of where things stand. But it'll behoove everyone if these two basketball hires work out really well. Fans will be happier. Charlie Cobb and President Blake will be happy because this hire will have gone better than their last two marquee ones in football and men's basketball. And I really think people can tell me that there's other things that they value, and I believe them. But I really think that at least if the results are better with the hires that have been made recently, some of the angst will dissipate because there'll be something to hang on to. Because right now what it really has been is this person that you hired is losing a lot of games when you hired them to keep a men's basketball team that had made the tournament multiple times going. Football had not been this bad basically since they transitioned out of the FCS era. And it's been that bad. You're looking for something other than that to cling on to, because right now it has been a lot of kind of the same cliches as far as renderings we've talked about for years on end at this point, and results that were not up to snuff. And so that ultimately, I think, is where I land, is the most important thing, is like there being some more wins to talk about, not just because we record a podcast that it's always better when we're talking about wins. More people are interested when there's wins, but I think because it's been just kind of the dregs, honestly, this year, if you've been following these programs, there's not been anything to flip that script. And so everyone's kind of piling it all on as one big blah, if I can say it like that.
No, I perfectly worded, truthfully. You know, it's not just because we, you know, get up here every week or whatever and talk about it. It's just they don't pay people for losing, you know, typically. They typically do not pay people to be losing as much as Georgia State has lost. So I do think that there is a chance things turn around. You know, kind of to my joke about the Super Bowl and like drafts in the Super Bowl. I do think that, you know, at least starting with football this fall, Georgia State has an opportunity to be better. You know, I don't think you and I are asking for anything crazy, but
don't make me put a number value on better, but certainly it can't get much worse.
Correct, it can't. You know, somebody out there is like, no, guys, it definitely can get worse. And to that I say, I do remember what Charlotte and UAB have looked like for the last 5 to 6 years, so you're not wrong.
And so we'll see on all this stuff. I mean, ultimately, like I say, there's reasons to believe, as we've laid out, the hires could work out, men's and women's basketball, and frankly, for everyone's sake, they kind of need to. That, along with whatever football can do to improve on a win-win season, will at least change the narrative around the programs, because right now it's been tough. And so when you're giving the status quo more run, when the status quo hasn't been working, I mean, you can look across society to say that people are getting frustrated with that type of thinking. And so things have got to change tangibly for this to not go down as just like more of the same mediocrity that people feel like has been setting in for Georgia State for a little bit of time now. Ultimately, just going to be, these programs going to have to do better to make people change their mind and have things tick up. But we can leave that existential side of things for now. Do want to mention the happy bit of news, and I mentioned a little bit earlier, that Georgia State does have an NCAA tournament representative for the 4th straight year. Beach volleyball has won the Sun Belt Conference Championship. They swept Coastal Carolina on Saturday in the title game. They will go to the NCAA tournament. They were the 15 seed. They will play Texas, the 2 seed, which they're still getting over the hurdle of going deep in the NCAA tournament, and there's good programs, a lot of resources that are at the top. But they're keeping their end of the bargain going as far as this has been the most prolific program that Georgia State's had in recent years. And they were able to bring home a Sun Belt title once again this year for the 4th straight season.
Yeah, it's always fun when, you know, one of the smaller sports ends up winning the Sun Belt. You know, I don't even say that as a dig. Like, it's just nice to see that Georgia State is also competitive in other sports. You know, beach volleyball's had a really good season. You know, shout out.
Yeah, and that's May 1st to 3rd. This is not the NCAA tournament where it is dragged over multiple weeks and different regionals. Friday, May 3rd is when it all starts in Gulf Shores, Alabama. Winners of the games in the first round on that day will move on to the quarterfinals on the Saturday, May the 2nd. Semifinals will happen that same night, that same afternoon, as the case may be. And then the championship will be on Sunday of that very same weekend as they crown the NCAA's best beach volleyball team of the year. And so coming up as you're listening to this podcast, sometime on Friday, Georgia State will be playing their first round game. They would play the winner of TCU Loyola Marymount, the 7-10 matchup, if they were able to advance past the Longhorns. But that is an ESPN2. The title game will be on ESPN if the 15 seed Cinderella Panthers make it that far on Sunday. So a lot to see there. And as we've just kind of gone through the distillation of how things have not gone well, it's a program that's done exactly what they've needed to, and they get the achievement of making the NCAA tournament once again for what they've been able to do in the Sun Belt in beach volleyball. And one last note on the NCAA side of things as we wrap up the non-baseball wing of this episode before we get to the interview with Shane Mettlen. Basketball tournament is going to be expanding. It has been long rumored, it has been long pilloried, but they're going to do it anyway. This is for both the men's and the women's basketball tournament. They will be starting this next season 76-team tournaments. There will be an extra round. It is going to squeeze out even more mid-majors. It's going to have even more 15, 16, 17 loss power conference teams make the tournament. It's going to push mid-major champions down into that first round, and so they have to play an extra round before they even get to the tournament. It is done for no reason but money, and it is against basically everyone's wishes that this is happening, and the details will be to come in more detail over the... I think mid-May is what they have said, is when we'll get more of an announcement and kind of the finer points, but you don't need many more finer points than this sucks, and this is a change no one has asked for, and yet we are getting it anyway, as has been the purview of the NCAA when making these expansive decisions for years at this point.
Yeah, it's very frustrating because, somebody in a suit is going to sit there and say, oh, it's great. This is, it's all about exposure. We just want more exposure. To which anybody with half a brain can respond, exposure? You mean the most watched college basketball, 4 days of the entire season? We don't need to add more exposure to that, And it's frustrating because, if you look, I know that Ken Pom is not everybody's Bible or anything like that, and the NCAA doesn't even use it, but somebody took the top, who were the, I think 12 teams that didn't make it in terms of their ranking. There were 15 and 18 teams there that had, relatively good Ken Pom scores, but would have been in the tournament, assuming that that's what they used, that had no business being in some sort of tournament, and it's frustrating because, like you said, this is just going to be an opportunity to get undeserving, high major teams in there, and I will fully eat my words here if they decide that they're actually going to, apply some level of fairness to, mid-major schools, but come on, man. We know how they work with these things.
The Belmont team this year, I forget the record off the top of my head, but they were the number 1 seed in the Missouri Valley. They lost in their first game in the Missouri Valley in Arch Madness to, I think, Drake. And it was basically okay, they're out. They're not going to make the 68-team field. And they didn't. I don't think they were even ever listed in any of the spots. But if you look at the numbers, under the way that everything currently was, if they expanded to 76, based on the criteria that, whether it's Ken Pom, whether it's the net, whatever, you would think they would probably be in. I kind of think they're not going to. If they had done this a year earlier, I kind of think that team would have been left out in lieu of your Auburn's. Auburn would have been one of the top teams in this new first round. You would have had your Virginia Tech would have been in there. And I even saw a Virginia Tech writer who was this would be bad. That Virginia Tech team did not need to be in the tournament. The issue is not even just that it is going to, until proven otherwise, going to be where some mid-level power conference teams get the edge over quality, good mid-majors that if you were going to expand the tournament, you would hope that that's who would be helping get in. It's also that it's if a team who's got a coach on the hot seat makes the bubble now in a 76-team tournament, they're probably staying another year or two because of that, the banner that the program's going to hang. And what if that is bad for the program? That it's what if actually being the 72nd team in the country is not progress? And what if you need to move on from a coach because you're kind of stagnating, but because he has that success and brings in the school a little bit of extra money, that wins him some more goodwill, also keeping some good coaches in other schools that have been grinding and deserving of a good opportunity stuck where they are because that job isn't opening. It's not even just oh, boo-hoo mid-majors. I get that is, for a lot of people, a lot of kind of a tired refrain at this point, though obviously we are not of that view. We are very pro mid-major here on this podcast. It is detrimental to the sport in general for that reason that is going to matter to those programs as well. Fans who have now a team who would make that first round are not suddenly going to love their coach. They want to be a top 4 seed in the tournament. They want to cut down the nets. They want to feel like they have a chance. I don't think you're going to convince any of the Auburn fans were not going to suddenly believe that they were going to be winning the NCAA tournament if they had got in this year as the 69th to 76th team. And so what are we actually helping? What is the point of this? And the answer, as I said, is nothing as far as the on-the-court stuff. And there's reasons for everyone who is going to be affected by this to dislike this. And yet, here we are, we're going to be doing it, and they'll probably point to some viewership stuff that it's like, look, these are the views we weren't getting before in this first round, but I do not think it is going to be the same number that you get when it gets to the field of 64 when the play-in rounds are over.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you and I are sickos. You know, we watch the first 4 games as much as we can. You know, there's thousands, honestly, millions of people like us, but are you going to really tell me that this whole round is going to drastically improve viewership enough to where you feel like this is really all that worth it? I would be shocked if it did.
I mean, it is kind of the thing where, like, the reason that they sold the conference expansion this last round, which was just the most... It is just about a bigger pile of money for these teams. It was like, the thinking was it's like Oregon and Michigan playing each other. People would see the helmets and be like, even if they're on a bar somewhere, they want to watch that. Or, you know, like, they'll turn on to Fox to watch that game. And it's like, maybe there's a point to that. But I really don't think that the same returns are going to be there for basketball. And, I mean, I'll just say, I can attest to this. The Patriots-Eagles Super Bowl, I was very miffed. I was like, I don't care if either of these teams win. I'm not going to enjoy this. This was, what, 2018, 2019? Yep. I didn't watch. I might do the same thing with this first round. You know, obviously, if Georgia State were to be in it, which a lot of hoops to jump through for that to even be a realm of possibility, I would be watching it. I'm not going to tell people who are fans of these schools that, like, they are bad people if they watch their team in an NCAA tournament game, because ultimately this is going to be the lay of the land as we go forward. But as a neutral, I almost feel like it is my job not to watch these games and to prove that it is not worth it. And just to say, no, we don't need this. The tournament as it was enough. And, like, if I miss a buzzer beater that happens in that week that doesn't happen the week after, I can live with that. And I kind of think everyone needs to take that attitude. We got to fight back on this front. CFP expansion seems to be happening there. It's a losing battle. Losing battles all the time on football. Maybe there's a chance with this one. At the very least, let's go down swinging, and let's not fall for this is the NCAA tournament, we must all watch it. Let's all band together and try and have sanity win again. Because it's a 12-round fight. Sanity's been on the floor a bunch recently, and these decisions have been made. So let's try and win one of these rounds.
I agree.
All right, and we're going to ping-pong back now. Going from, like, happy news to soapbox to happy news to soapbox. It is happy news again. Georgia State baseball did have a good week on the diamond. They did 2 of 3.
It was almost the soapbox, though, to be clear. I'll let you finish.
How quickly these things can turn, because they lose the opener 10-2 on Friday. They flip around, they even the series, they win a 10-4 win on Saturday, and then they are down 7-3 in the ninth. Looks like they might drop a home series to Old Dominion. Kind of a pivotal series both ways as far as conference seeding and where everyone's going to finish in the league. It's still a whole big mess we'll get into. Cole Griffith steps up to the plate. Game time grand slam. I think the best, most exciting play that can happen in a sporting event. Not just a home run that ties the game, not just a home run in general. Grand slam changes the expectations of a game in the drop of a hat like no other event you can get. Where suddenly it flips, like, all the way where you're down by 4 and now it's a tie game. And then 10th inning, Wills McGinnis gets a walk-off solo shot. Georgia State wins the finale 8-7 in 10 innings. They improve back to 500 at 22-22. They're 10-11 in Sun Belt play. Every one of these wins is going to be precious, as they are now in a 5-way tie at 10-11 with 2 teams behind them at 9-12, tied for, I guess, technically 6th place, but whatever that actually works out to. This was a big one. ODU's in that bunch as well, so even just getting one over on them matters. And like I say, exciting stuff in the bus lot.
Yeah, they've got 9 Sun Belt games remaining. I mean, this is crunch time, and we've seen them, falter a little bit before. And I'm gonna be cliche and say that something like that type of win against Old Dominion, in the last game of your series, it can give you some positive momentum going forward. It's a pity that the 2 games this week got canceled. They were supposed to play Alcorn State today, or yesterday at the time of recording this. And Tuesday, they're supposed to play Alabama State, but
inspired bit of scheduling there going on.
Yeah,
those were on the road. It was like who are they playing? It's like, oh, they're going on the road to Louisiana this weekend. They're going to hit Alabama State and Alcorn State on the way. It's like, this makes total sense. This is a nice bit of scheduling. I bet Strom was happy. It's like, man, this works out great. And then Mother Nature did not abide, and so those games won't happen. It will just be the weekend series against the Cajuns. But like you say, 3 series left. A lot up in the air, and it's like every one of these wins and losses will factor into. I don't think that all of the teams in that bunch are even safe to make the tournament still. So it's like someone's going to get left to have their season end early if they're not racking up enough wins here down the stretch. And just by the nature of it, a lot of these teams are playing each other. Louisiana is 9-12, so they're looking to jump Georgia State and a bunch of other teams by getting a home sweep here this weekend, get back to 500 in the league, heading into the final 2 series. And look, they'd have to win out or win 8 of the final 9 to get to 30 wins at 22-22. This back to Georgia State now, and that's felt like the hopeful standard to get to every year is like above 500 winning record, 30 wins, all the rest of it. That still feels far gone, but a lot still in front of them, and they've done a really nice job of salvaging the season after it felt like it might be going sideways.
Yeah, take 2 of 3. If they can take 2 of 3 in 2 of these 3 series, especially Georgia Southern, who's having a pretty terrible season this year, that would go a long way to keep them above the quote-unquote relegation line in terms of making the Sun Belt tournament.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a team that I think overall the Cajuns are 27-18, so this is no slouch, even though you're above them in the standings right now. It's a road series, so that has its own challenges as well, and they, like I laid out, have a lot to play for as well as you do. This series, the Georgia Southern series, those will be important because you're going to finish out the year, going to play an App State team who right now is tied for second, 13-8 in the league, has had a big run here, jumping into that top 4, into the top tier of the league, along with your Coastal Carolinas, Southern Miss, and Troy, who have been kind of the standout programs of the conference in baseball the last few years. That's your finale, and that'll be the finale, at least we hope, the final series that is played for Georgia State baseball at the complex out at the bus lot. So you are not only just running out of games, but these next 2 series that you have feel like, they're both on the road, so the challenges are there, feel like you want to at least get to 4-2 in this next six in conference, and you play Kennesaw in there as well, to give yourself some leeway to know that you're going to face a challenge when App State come down to Atlanta, because they've been rocking and rolling right now up in Boone. All right, with that, we maybe went further than I expected, but look, this news piles up on you even when we feel like it's the down period. It doesn't turn out to be that way. We haven't had a lot to talk about with the men's basketball program or the women's basketball program because the news is still filtering in. The roster is still getting assembled there, so we will continue to be on top of that stuff and track it as that. By the next time we record, probably there will be more news to cover on those fronts. But the last things to mention, the Hall of Fame class was assembled, the Golden Panther Awards on Monday evening. I'm actually a former winner of a Golden Panther, not to brag, but I've been in that ceremony before, and I am in the Georgia State annals somewhere as a representative of the spirit in the band. And the Hall of Fame class had been announced. R.J. Hunter is there, and Ron Hunter is there. Kind of a big moment to have the Hunters back in a Georgia State event. Very cool for him. Ulrich John gets put into the Hall of Fame. The whole class is in, and then the surprise announcement that was made, David Carroll Cohen inducted into the Georgia State Athletics Hall of Fame. More than 4 decades of extraordinary service and impact on the university community. Obviously, everyone knows Voice of the Panther, former guest on this podcast, Dave Cohen. more than 4 decades, Georgia State's radio guy, broadcast coordinator. Now it's football to talk about, but did all over the years, and some of them not very good seasons for men's basketball, baseball as well. Done a ton behind the scenes that, frankly, whenever he has called his last game at Georgia State, big shoes to fill that I'm not sure if those conversations have happened yet, but they need to be ready because that is a monumental loss. That is, whenever the day comes that Dave calls his last game, almost irreplaceable for what he's done. And then Carol Cohen as well, director of University Advisement Center, has done a lot of work for the university as well. So I can't tell, I wasn't there. I don't know if this was a surprise to them or just it was a surprise announcement that was made, but hopefully a great evening for them, well deserved of the accolade, and just two people that have done a ton for this university over the years.
Yeah, I mean, if you are a student or if you've, had any sort of interaction with Georgia State athletics, it's basically impossible to miss, Dave Cohen. So obviously the highest of congratulations to both him and his wife. I mean, I think the only surprise here is that this hasn't happened already, and I get
one of those
why.
Things you kind of think maybe he's been a Hall of Famer all along. It's this hasn't happened yet, but yeah. You like to do it as a post-career honorific, but frankly, he's been doing it long enough, and it's just you just go ahead and do it. He certainly has earned it by this point. Him and Carol have earned it at this point.
And, it makes all the sense. He just wants to keep doing his thing, and they're going to keep allowing this really good announcer to keep doing his thing. So at some point, you got to honor him, but I totally get why it hasn't happened.
Yeah, and it just adds to, the importance of, R.J. Hunter and Dave Cohen going into Hall of Fame at the same time. I mean, Dave was there for R.J.'s years, but spans a greater part of the Georgia State athletics picture as a whole, but feels right. And, you throw over Jon in there, who's the first Georgia State player, I believe, to got a Super Bowl ring. He got it with the Patriots back in 2018. There's a lot of, capturing what has been the successes of this whole endeavor over the last 2 decades just in this one Hall of Fame class. So just a nice moment that came up, and certainly a welcome surprise for Georgia State onlookers to see that Dave and Carol got the announcement along with the rest of the Hall of Famers this past week. Congratulations to everyone inducted. And with that, thank you for listening to this episode. We will play you out. We spoke to Shane Mettlen of the Daily News Record up in Harrisonburg about Jon Cremins, his impact on James Madison's tournament team a few years back, and what he thinks of the higher and Sunbelt hoops as a whole. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Thursday Night Podcast, and we will catch you next time. We've been looking into trying to get every kind of bit of information we can about Jon Cremins as he's going to start as Georgia State's men's basketball coach, and so going to the source on this one for someone who has had a front row seat for the last time Coach Cremins was a part of a Sunbelt winning team at James Madison, Shane Mettlen, who covers JMU for the Daily News Record up in Harrisonburg. Shane, thanks for hopping on the Thursday Night Podcast for the first time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
So I guess the first place is the most obvious to start of, what you saw from what Jon Cremins did when he was an assistant there under Mark Byington at JMU on a team that ultimately ended up winning an NCAA tournament game.
Yeah, I mean, he was part of a really good staff. I mean, Jon was one of at least a couple of assistants while they were at JMU that was getting interviews for head coaching jobs. I think it might have worked out better for him that he didn't get some of the ones that he was looking at back then, just because I think, jumping from a Vanderbilt rather than from a mid-major, probably opened the doors to, better jobs like Georgia State and Sun Belt level jobs. But he is somebody who's kind of been in the mix for head coaching jobs for a while as an assistant, which I think says something about, obviously his pedigree, his name resonates in the Atlanta area, I'm sure, having Cremins as his last name. But, the amount of success that staff has had, and Mark Byington was able to keep a staff together for quite a while. Cremins was kind of his right-hand man, even going back to the Georgia Southern days, and they were at Charleston together too. So longtime guy with Byington who's getting the opportunity on his own now. And I think it's a really interesting hire for Georgia State.
You mentioned some of those, the Atlanta name and all the rest of it. And there were certainly some Atlanta ties on the best of those James Madison teams that Cremins, I'm sure, was a part of assembling that roster, bringing some guys in from Atlanta.
Yeah, I think Terrence Edwards in particular was somebody he'd had a good relationship with and was able to recruit out of Atlanta. And TJ Bickerstaff was the guy that got out of the transfer portal for just 1 year at JMU, also an Atlanta kid who really, really was a key guy on that team that you mentioned that went to the NCAA tournament and won a game against Wisconsin. He might have been a little bit more the relationship was with Byington, but like the Atlanta ties, the Georgia ties definitely paid off in recruiting for them. While they were at JMU, and I think they continued to kind of work that area at Vanderbilt too.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the past players that Coach Cremins has, been a part of recruiting to James Madison and, like you just said, Vanderbilt. What are some of the things that you noticed about some of the players and the things that, Coach Cremins liked in those practices? Because I imagine he was probably a little bit more hands-on with some of the players than Coach Byington was.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy. I mean, I think it's interesting, just to know that, he's not a tall guy. He definitely didn't play center, but he's coached bigs. Kind of been had that role in some of Byington's staff at times, which I think says something about just his ability to relate to players. Like even if, like I said, it wasn't the position he played growing up or anything like that. He knows the game really well, and yeah, I think that'll be something that's also interesting to see as things develop with him is, moving on to that role where, you could be kind of like that guy as an assistant where, you're bringing some of the fire sometimes. You don't have to be the bad guy every day, things like that. And you take on more when you become a head coach. But he did have that relationship with players, certainly as a recruiter, but also once they got to campus. There are definitely some guys where, they were Cremins guys and he would be the one they would go to.
I guess in a general sense, what made those teams tick at James Madison? Obviously Byington is the head guy, but what was like the personality, the traits of those teams that made them successful and what they looked like on the court?
I mean, there was great chemistry, I think, from some of those teams early on. And it was it gets harder and harder to do this, obviously, at the mid-major level, but it was always a good mix with Byington at JMU of guys that they'd had in the system, not year one, but by year 4, there was a mix of guys that they'd had in the system for a while, were building around versus like, okay, we're going to fill this gap with a transfer. Like TJ Bickerstaff that I mentioned before. It was like, we needed a big, and they go out and get him and, really fit that role. But, they also had guys like Terrence Edwards who had been in the program for 4 years at that point. If he can do that kind of thing at Georgia State, with some of them, maybe with some Atlanta guys in particular, if he can have some that he recruits out of high school and keeps around for 3 or 4 years and then fills it in with some of those guys that, we've seen at Georgia State here, even under previous coaching staff, Atlanta guys want to come home after they've been elsewhere. I think if he can build similar kind of chemistry with people who knew each other, even if they hadn't played for a while, like, Bickerstaff and Edwards were really tight as Atlanta guys, even though they were only teammates for a year. And that chemistry really showed, I think, with the best JMU teams from that staff.
And I guess a general thing, because you're one of the people who covers the Sun Belt team who I think is just talking about the league's status more than basically anyone else. And you're getting talking to a lot of people in and around the conference. Just where do you see the league right now in basketball? Because obviously Mark Byington, we've just talked about, had good James Madison teams. He's now at Vanderbilt. Scott Cross just had back-to-back teams from Troy make the NCAA tournament, but he's at Georgia Tech now. And I guess where do you see the league, especially as there's a new Don, as we'll have talked about before. We spoke to you on this interview about 76 team NCAA tournament now moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think in theory a 76-team NCAA tournament makes it a little bit more reasonable to try to hope for a second bid, but I don't know that the Sun Belt's that close to it right now. Like, I mean, you can even go back to, we were talking about that specific JMU team that won a game, and there was another team, App State, that year was a really, really good team. And I don't know that they were particularly close to making it, even if it was a 76-team field. They were certainly deserving, but just as tough as it is to kind of manipulate the net and everything, the Sun Belt's quite a ways from being a two-bid league right now, and it's tough. It seems like the toughest sport for the conference as a whole to kind of turn it around in is men's basketball. Women's basketball has been better in recent years. Obviously, baseball and softball and volleyball and lots of things can be multi-bid leagues. And, you get a team into the college football playoff, and that's always the goal. But it's really hard in basketball for a variety of reasons. And I don't know how long you want me to go into that, but not everybody in the conference is necessarily on the same page about what it takes to become a better mid-major basketball league. I don't think that's part of it. But also, it's just everybody who plays Division I sports wants to have a good men's basketball team because that's where the money is. You make money by getting into the NCAA tournament. So, maybe the Sun Belt can put a little extra emphasis on baseball and get those extra teams in. But, all your peers, Conference USA, the Big South, anybody you want to call like a peer conference in basketball is also trying to do it. And I think it's just really hard in men's basketball.
I guess as stepladder going up to eventually hoping to get to two bids in the tournament, more than that, because that's certainly possible. You look across other, at least former mid-majors. What are some steps along the way you think they need to get to show progress to maybe get back to where you're having the conversation of the Sun Belt men's basketball scene is trending up?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it is that the net and some of the metrics that they use for the NCAA tournament, they rely so heavily on good scheduling and scheduling to I don't know if manipulate is the right word, but to maximize what you're going to do in those. And not everybody in the Sun Belt isn't quite on the same page with that. There's different situations, James Madison, and I'm guessing similar with Georgia State, they have these brand new sparkling arenas or, 4 or 5 year old arenas that they want to play home games in, and they're going to buy home games and everything. And you got others who, maybe ULM struggles a little bit with the money side of things. It's like, well, we're just going to go play a lot of road games and get paid for it. And, the conference office wants Sun Belt teams to play home games. They want them to play home games against teams they can beat. Maybe go play 1 or 2 bye games to help your budget and things. But, the goal from the Sun Belt office and from a lot of the schools is, hey, we got to win 60% of our non-conference games, maybe 70% of our non-conference games. And, that's hard to do because some schools just really can't afford to go buy a bunch of wins and have them come into their place to play. So, I mean, it's tough to just kind of have all 14 programs wanting to do the same thing to really help bring the bottom of the conference up because, each year here, these last 2 years, you've had somebody, maybe multiple teams that have been, sub 300 in net. And that's tough when you've got to play them in conference, maybe sometimes 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, and I think certainly Georgia State, who's been one of the better teams in the league in the past, maybe not when JMU's been in the league, but another story there. Being better, improving with this hire, hoping to be part of that picture. Shane, thanks for letting us pick your brain on Cremins when he was at JMU and just the wider thoughts on the Sun Belt, because I think everyone wants to see, like you say, everyone wants that money, but also fans want to see that success in men's basketball, and it's maybe been missing on a consistent level. We'll see what Cremins can bring to Atlanta. Thank you for giving us a little bit of a picture of your insight of him as an assistant there at JMU, part of a Sun Belt winning program before now.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.